right, I think? Yes. I know I'm the last talk before lunch, so as required, I'm supposed to make a joke about being the last talk before lunch. This is that joke. Anywho, today, welcome to what we do in the shadows, going dark with consumer electronics. We're going to talk about some personal privacy stuff today. Beforehand, a little bit about me. You can find me on Twitter at Timmy Doomsday. I'm a father, a husband, a yinzer. Go Steelers. We're not talking about the Steelers right now. By day, I work as a security engineer, and at night, I'm also the co-founder of Black Bear InfoSec. A little bit about what we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about the privacy problem, some essentials, tools that you're going to need to take back your privacy. We'll walk through a practical example. We'll do some try harder measures, some things you can do that go above and beyond, and then hopefully we will have time for Q&A. I anticipate there being time for Q&A. So let's just jump into it. First things first, we need to talk about you, all right? Because this is really about you, right? And everything that you need in order to live life, right? So we have your credit cards, your bank accounts, your cell phone, and your computer. Without those, you pretty much cannot exist or function easily in today's economy, right? And then we have everything that you buy, right? Everything that you need to pay for, everything that you use, your clothes, your car, your cameras, your pictures, you're eating out, your social media habits. And what all of this information does is create a unique picture of who you are as a person. And that information is valuable. That's why there are companies that exist selling this information. They can target you specifically. And the reason they're able to do that is because of what we call primary keys. So primary keys include phone number, email address, name, address, IP address, the IME ID of your phone, and your browser fingerprint. Now, if you're like me, though, you see all this cool tech stuff, right? And you want to be able to use it, but you know that they're selling that data, right? But you want to use this. Don't tell me that you don't want to be able to yell at your Amazon Echo and have it change this thermostat, or you realize you're out of, I don't know, maybe a 16-pack of Red Bull while you're trying to write a presentation for Secure West Virginia, and you don't want to have to deal with any of that, so you just yell at your Siri, and a package shows up 2 days later, right? But you also know that they're selling that data. But you want to use it. So, here's my suggestion, and this is how we're going to fix this problem. Don't use it. Any questions? I got plenty of time. We got time for questions, right? Exactly. Now, we want to be able to use this, right? So how can we use all of this cool stuff but not give up all of our information? Well, fortunately, they all require an account. And this is where we can start going dark, right? So before we had this really unique web of things that make you uniquely you to these companies. Well, what if we could do with our personal lives what we already do with our data on our networks? And that's segment it, firewall it off from one another. And that's actually possible. You can create multiple identities and be multiple people for a relatively low investment. But we need some essentials in order to do that. And the first things first, we need a phone. Because without a phone, you don't have a phone number. And without a phone number, you can't register for a lot of these services. So, how many Android users do I have in the audience? You guys are going to hate me. I'm so sorry. So, this is not going to be a conversation about what is secure and what is private. I definitely think that Android is one of the more secure operating systems. I definitely think it's up to snuff, but I know for a fact it is not nearly as private as Apple devices. The problem with Google is that they make their living off of selling your information. And while I don't like Apple, they have found it profitable to their shareholders to market privacy and be a private company for you. This will change over time, but for right now, Apple is probably going to be your best bet when it comes to a private cell phone. Walled garden arguments aside. And the reason I'm using Apple is because it's also it's something that people are familiar with. A lot of these privacy measures, I don't want just you to be able to use. I want you to be able to take these measures home and teach them to your mom and your aunts and your cousins and your friends and your loved ones, right? And the next honorable mention, which is Graphene OS, is not something you're going to want to walk them through. So Graphene OS is actually an Android fork of Copperhead OS. Don't use Copperhead OS. I cannot verify that it's actually secure. But Graphene OS is made by the original developer of Copperhead OS. It is private by design. Think of it like cubes for your phone. We'll get into that in a little. Think of it like cubes for your phone. It's from the ground up, stripped out of everything that Google needs in order to track you, with some extra bits put in. The problem is, in order to do that, there's a specific device set that you need, and then you have to, you're not walking your mom through using ADB and Fastboot to flash her Pixel 3 over the phone. That's not going to happen. That's not a supportable model. That might work for you. That's why I mention it. So we need an iPhone. But the question I always get is, well, Tim, don't iPhones cost a lot of money? Yes, they do. However, you can get a pretty cheap iPhone 6s, which is still remarkably supported under the current iOS 13, for anywhere between $100 to $200, depending on where you pick it up and what sales they have. So I wouldn't say that that's out of the realm of possibility. But next we need cell service, because we need to be able to send and receive text messages, send and receive data, which means we're going to need a SIM card. And here's the problem with SIM cards, right? Has anyone heard of SIM jacking, SIM swapping? Yeah? Okay, cool. So basically it's when you call the telephone company and use information to transfer your phone number to a different SIM card for malicious purposes. We're going to circumvent all of that. Mint SIM is a great company. They resell T-Mobile, and more importantly, they do not require real information about you in order to register for their service. They take prepaid cards, they take gift cards, and then they really only need enough information about you that you'll remember to open the account. So you can be John Doe. And we're going to get to why we're not going to actually use the phone number attached to this SIM card in a minute, but that's going to be important. The other alternative is you could actually do this whole setup with a iPod Touch and a mobile hotspot. I recommend the Calyx Institute. They're a nonprofit that will let you, for a donation, they provide you with an unlimited hotspot. I think it's like $600 a year through Sprint, which is fantastic, and eliminates a lot of the IMEID tracking. But let's get into our toolkit. All right, so we have a cell phone. We are able to connect to the internet. Now what? Because we want to actually start using these services that are attached to all these cool devices, right? Well, first we need email, and it needs to be private. And this is how we're going to set it up. We're going to find a privacy-focused provider. We're going to create a new account. We're going to use I shouldn't have to say this, but I do. Two-factor and a secure password. And more importantly, don't use this email anywhere. And we're going to get to why in a minute. All of this is going to make sense in the practical example. Some private email providers. This is a list from privacytools.io, which is a great resource if you're ever like, I want to use this service, but I don't think it's private. Privacytools.io will probably have an alternative for you that you can use. Of these, I recommend the top three: ProtonMail, disroot.org, and Tuntanota. They have legal backing behind them that has shown them to be private. And that's pretty much it. You're going to set up that email and you're going to hold on to that. Don't tell anyone that you have this email, and preferably don't make it easily identifiable to you. So don't make it SoccerChick99 or, HackerDude38. You want to make it so that it's not tied to any identifiable info about you. But now that we have that private email, well, we're not giving that out. How do we send and receive email? Well, that's where Blur comes in. And Blur allows you to create masked emails that you're able to create per service that you use, and it will forward all of those emails to your private email. So Blur is the only company that's really going to ever know what that private email is. There is an honorable mention, which is 33mail. It will allow you to create a unique subdomain, and then sort of like how you can use tags in Gmail, it will auto-generate email addresses on the fly to that subdomain. So, for example, if you're signing up for Slack, you wouldn't have to go in and create a Slack email address. You could just sign up for Slack with like slack@hackerdude.33mail.com, and it would auto-generate that email address and forward all your email. The only reason why it's an honorable mention and not my go-to strategy is because that domain name becomes unique to you, and that is something that companies will be able to pivot on. But we're able to get emails. Now, a lot of these services, they require some sort of credit card or something to use some of their more premium services. For example, Amazon Prime, Apple Music. You want to be able to use that stuff with these devices. That's why you bought them. So we need to be able to make payments. And that's where privacy.com is going to come in. Privacy.com, if you haven't seen it, they allow you to create single-use or single-vendor credit cards. The purchases are then obscured from your real info when you make purchases. So we'll just validate with whatever information you give them. So it doesn't actually have to be your personal information. And on the other side, privacy.com obscures the info that your bank is receiving. So when you make a purchase, instead of Walmart.com appearing on your bank statement, you can have it say privacy.com. So according to my bank, I shop exclusively at the NSA gift shop. That's where I get all my groceries, all my Christmas presents, all of it. So finally, we've talked about SIM cards, we talked about phones, we haven't talked about phone numbers. Remember before I said we're not using our actual phone number that's tied to our SIM card. And the phone number we're going to use is going to be through an app called MySudo. And this is also why iOS is the preferred platform, because at this current moment, MySudo is only on iOS. They haven't ported it to Android just yet, but I hear that it's coming. But for right now, you're sort of locked into the iOS ecosystem if you want to use this app. So it will allow you to create multiple identities with local phone numbers and email addresses that will appear to everyone else as real. It'll allow you to communicate with non-MySudo users, so you'll actually be able to call out to your local numbers and internationally. And more importantly, it's going to be a replacement for your primary phone number. So when we create multiple identities, we would create multiple identities for what we're going to be for our use cases, right? For example, I have a MySudo that I gave out to my wife and my family. I have a MySudo that I give out when I go to the gas station and I fill up and I want those sweet, like return dollars. I have a MySudo that I use for every other store membership or Amazon, what have you. There's one specifically for 2FA. I do not give out the number associated with my SIM card, which is twofold. One, I skip out of all those SIM jacking attacks. But more importantly, I can swap my SIM card whenever I want and frequently do. And you should too. So you eliminate the ability to track what SIM card you have. Now we got to talk about your old number for a minute, because that is still tied to you. You've probably used it for a while now. I know a lot of people haven't changed their phone number in like a decade. What do you do with that old phone number? Because people are going to still try and contact that phone number, right? It's not like you get a new phone number and magically everyone's contact list updates, right? So what you don't want to have happen is you get rid of that phone number, and then that number goes back into the public pool of available phone numbers, and now someone else is receiving texts meant for you. And this is where, this is the only time I'm going to recommend a Gmail service, or a Google service, I apologize. Google service, which is Google Voice. Google Voice will allow you to port your personal phone number to their service. Now, you probably already have a Gmail address. They probably already have a significant amount of information on you there. Don't go out and create a Gmail address just to do this. Use one that that's already been burned. And you would just port your phone number over to this Gmail address. And then what you'll be able to do is forward any calls or messages that you receive on that number to your private email address via Blur or 33 mail. And then be able to respond to those people from your new number and be able to tell them, hey, you know what, my number's changed. Here's my new contact info, whatever it may be. And the reason I recommend Gmail is because, again, private, no. Secure, probably one of the best companies when it comes to security, right? So we have our toolkit, and I'm sure a lot of this seems sort of disparate. We're actually going to start putting this all together in a practical example so you can see how all of this sort of flows together, right? So remember, before we have this, we want to be here. Not this, not this, right? So let's pretend, for example, we won an Amazon Echo with one of our vendors outside, right? And we want to be able to use that. But that needs to be tied to an Amazon account. Well, we just talked about how Amazon and Google and everyone is selling our data. How do we do that while maintaining privacy? Well, that's where Blur comes in. We can actually hop in and create a new account, give it a Blur email address with a super secure password. Blur is going to go ahead and forward that email to my Proton Mail address. I'll be able to verify it, and now I have a verified email on an Amazon.com account. Next, we want to set up two-factor authentication. That requires a phone number. That's where my sudo comes in. So what we do is we log into my sudo and we create a new identity. We pick a phone number. The identity is created, and you can see that Amazon has no problem sending you a one-time password to verify that phone number. So now we have our Amazon Echo. It's got an account that's registered. We have two-factor authentication set up. We want to be able to make purchases. I want to be able to yell that I need, I don't know, Soylent at 3 a.m. at this Amazon Echo. So we need to be able to make purchases, and that is where privacy.com comes in. We log in and create a new card. That is a real card, so the first person to be able to punch that number in gets $10 on Amazon. Go ahead, have at. But we can see here, it has no problem verifying our fake name on the card, and that's a, which one is that? Wilshire Boulevard. Yeah, that's just a hotel in the middle of LA. Doesn't actually have to be real information. Amazon accepts it, no problem. So now we have an Amazon Echo that we have a phone number tied to, and a credit card tied to, and we're able to make purchases, right? We're basically private. We've done it. That's it. End of discussion. There's nothing else we can do, right? Right? No. I'm sure you all have already sort of picked apart some of this stuff and gone, well, hey, where are you receiving this stuff? What about your IP address? What about this? What about that? Well, that's where we're going to get into some of this try harder stuff. First thing we're going to do is worry about our ISP. So keep in mind that this was created before NordVPN had its whole debacle. You're going to want a VPN, right? You want to protect the information that's flowing to and from your computer. You want to obscure it through a VPN. My recommendations are actually ExpressVPN and private internet access. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion around like Five Eyes and this, that, and the other thing. But ExpressVPN and private internet access are the only two companies that have legal backing where their claims of not having logs or information on the people using their service, those have been tested in Turkish and American courts. So I can say with some amount of certainty that they actually stick true to the claims they're making. The most important thing, though, when it comes to these services that we're talking about, you need to pay for it. The reason why you get Gmail for free is because you are the product. Pay for these services so that they can stay in business and they don't have to resort to selling your data. So that covers your personal devices, right? But what about the rest of your network? I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to a layperson about setting up a VPN, but as soon as you get past the word or the letter V, their eyes glaze over, they roll back into their head, and they just think you're paranoid, right? So what I actually suggest is for the loved ones in your home that maybe aren't tech savvy, you can actually tunnel everything over a VPN to these VPN services using some of this awesome router software. OpenSense and pfSense are two forks of the same software, but they will allow you to install on pretty much anything relatively secure router OS, and they will also allow you to do like enterprise features such as tunneling all your traffic out over one of those previously mentioned VPNs. And they support a ton of hardware. You can run it on, Protectly is what I use. They're basically NUCs, but for routers. You could also just run it off of an Intel NUC. I'm a big fan of eBay hardware as well. I'm a big fan of making sure that stuff doesn't wind up in the trash and you're actually recycling stuff. But realistically, anything with 2 NICs and 4 gigs of RAM and an okay processor, and as long as you have storage space for logs, you could run this off of a USB stick. So we've covered your ISP. Let's talk about your personal computer. So you have 2 real options, Macs and PCs. And it's going to be a shocker, but I would actually recommend the Lenovo over Apple any day. You can pick up a used Lenovo for anywhere between $100 to $200. They're usually from enterprise companies, which means they were taken care of by some stickler IT guy. And they're in relatively good condition. The other thing that's great about them is you can install Core Boot on them, most of them, and eliminate any proprietary software that actually runs on these devices. So then we need to talk about what OS we're installing, right? Well, Windows 10 is kind of a privacy nightmare by default, and Macs, Apple just makes dumb decisions. I can't express to you how dumb the decisions they make sometimes when it comes to their software. So unfortunately, or fortunately, Linux is the way you're going to want to go with some of this, right? And again, there's really 2 options. I recommend for 99% of people, a hardened Debian instance is more than enough. If you want to get really sticklery about it, what you could do is use Debian, which is, again, there's no proprietary software in there at all. It's all open source software if you want to be able to actually look in and peek at the code. The other option, which is what I use, is actually called Cubes. Has anyone heard of Cubes? Okay, cool. So for everyone else, Cubes is doing for your computer what we just did for our life, essentially. It is a hypervisor operating system that has a desktop and a GUI, and will actually spin up individual VM instances based on what you're doing. So you would have, for example, a personal VM, and that's where you did all your personal social media stuff. You would have a secure VM, and that's where you did all your banking. You could have a VM that just has, say, your password database, and that doesn't actually get connected to the internet. That's just there so that you can copy and paste passwords from it into your other services. It's a fantastic, fantastic tool, and honestly warrants a talk on its own. But then we talked about services a little bit in that they're connected to these IoT devices, these consumer electronics that we want to use. And we use a lot of them every day, and in addition to these devices, these services are also collecting information about us. And they're almost impossible to avoid, right? You need a password manager. You need an easy way to share files. You need to be able to search the web. All of this stuff you sort of can't get away from. And for most lay people, that is the case. If they need to share files, they're going to Dropbox. If they need to search something, they're going to Google. Everyone in this room is in a unique position that they have some interest in technology and thus have the ability to self-host alternatives. And this is the thing that I really want to drive home is you don't have to use any of the services directly tied to these devices. There's more than one way to skin a cow. You can self-host a ton of these alternatives or a ton of these solutions, and you would be doing yourself and your loved ones a great service by ripping them out of these ecosystems. Nextcloud is awesome as a Dropbox alternative, as well as like Google Drive and calendars and stuff. Bitwarden has come a long way as far as password management, and I would say is a great competitor to LastPass and 1Password. MB, instead of Netflix, you can use MB with your own personal media that you acquire, right? And you might think, okay, well, I don't really have a whole lot of time to stand that all up. And that's where I can honestly recommend wholeheartedly a project by a dude named Nick Busey called HomeLab OS. It's just a set of Ansible scripts, which if you have an hour and 500 extra gigs of hard drive space, you can spin up a lot of these solutions in about a half an hour. And you can get the DNS records and everything set up in an afternoon. It's not that difficult. And this tool makes it really easy. So let's talk about some cons to all of this, right? Because this all sounds all well and good, but there are some significant downsides. One, it's hard with some of these services to get around. They recognize a lot of these phone numbers as quote-unquote disposable and will not let you register. My recommendation for that is, unfortunately, just don't use those services. The other thing is a lot of places get real sketchy about privacy.com because the way privacy.com works, those credit cards are actually recognized as gift cards. So a lot of people think you're trying to scam them, specifically PayPal, which don't use PayPal. I can't say that enough. Don't avoid PayPal at all costs. But they'll get real sketch about like gift cards. Second or third, there's added complexity to your life because now, in addition to managing your own personal information, you also have to worry about all the fake information that you just created, right? So now it's not just, John. It's also John and Joe and Steve and Dave and Alyssa. All these fake personas that you've created, you now have to remember or keep track of all of that information. For example, if I were to die today, my wife would lose the house because she would be unable to pay any of the bills because none of them are in my name. And finally, it doesn't account for anyone else. So like the wife example before, yeah, this will cover you, but this is not going to prevent, your aunt or your cousin or your uncle from putting your phone number in their phone and then downloading some sketchy app that sips up all their data, or tagging a photo of you on Facebook. This doesn't account for those people. But more critically, there's two things. Privacy fatigue is probably the biggest one. This is a lot of work. Like, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. This is a ton of work. And honestly, it shouldn't be. There should be controls in place to prevent this from being a thing, right? This warrantless scooping of your own data. And more importantly, money. We are all fortunate enough to have money to come to this conference, to be able to stay in a hotel or be able to pay for the ticket. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that same financial buying power, right? And unfortunately, those are the people that are most susceptible to their data being slurped up. A person that's living paycheck to paycheck is not going to be able to buy or worry about their privacy because they're too worried about putting food on the table. And that should not be the case. They should have just as much right to their personal privacy as we do. And that's why privacy should never be kept behind a paywall. I don't think you should have to pay to make yourself private. That should be a protection that's in place inherently in our system. And fortunately in California, I think it was last week actually, the EFF just ruled that they passed a law that adds some consumer privacy protections, but not a lot. And that's where we really need to get. Also, real quick shout out to Rachel Lamp of Badass Army. If you're not following them on Twitter, you really should. They do wonderful work for revenge porn laws. That's antecedent to all of this. I just like giving them a shout out. Here's a list of all of my resources. I encourage you, don't just take me at blind faith. Go look at these services, read their privacy policies. Really dig in there. And one tip I will give you right off the bat, if they say third-party services and they mention your data will be shared with third-party services in the normal doing business of X service, that means they're selling your data. If they don't call out specifically what they're using and who's getting what data, they are selling your data. And then finally, the privacy and the Privacy, Security, and OSINT show. Michael Bazzelli, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. He is a fantastic resource, and I can't say enough good things about him. He is the reason that this talk exists. He was the inspiration, and you should really listen to his podcast. If this was not enough, or you feel like you want to learn more, his podcast is a fantastic resource. That is my time. I think I have about 20 minutes for questions. Are there any questions? Oh, I'm sorry, in the back? I'm excited to see what happens, but from my understanding, the Librem phone is sort of in... They're very confusing with the information they put out about that phone. Their blog posts are kind of weird, and it doesn't sound like they know what they're doing when it comes to phone production. Their laptops, I think they have a very different model because their laptops are basically like white label Toshibas that they sent schematics to in China, and they're like Toshiba shells, and they just rebrand them and put their information. And the work that they've done on the software side for the Intel management engine and the pressure they've put on Intel is fantastic, but I don't know if they know how to build a phone. I don't. So I'm hesitant to be like, yeah, that's a great option. I would want to wait until I see that mature. I don't. It's great for... It's a great step forward, I would say, but I wouldn't say that it is something that's... I don't like having all my eggs in one basket. So I don't want to trust Apple with a whole lot, even though I trust them significantly more than maybe some other companies. There's always the chance that they will realize that, hey, maybe privacy isn't what our shareholders want anymore. It's not economically viable as a selling point or marketable, and they'll flip the switch. And that's always been my concern. So I can recommend Apple right now, but in the long term, we'll just have, it's just sort of a wait and see sort of approach. PayPal is just not and I should, let me preface my PayPal comments. I am overwhelmingly biased when it comes to PayPal, not necessarily because of their business practices from a privacy standpoint, but just them as a company. I don't like them as a company. They have removed funding from privacy-focused projects and hackers, but still allow certain extremist groups to receive funding. They're very flaky when it comes to that sort of stuff, and I just don't like them. So please take that with a grain of salt. My PayPal statements are significantly skewed. And, oh, yep. Absolutely. What was it? Like 300 Wilshire Boulevard, Beverly Hills, 90210. And then my phone number is 412-867-5309. The presentation, actually, if anyone wants copies of the presentation or I didn't put the resource slides up long enough, you can find it online. If you go to my Twitter handle, Timmy Doomsday, there's a pinned tweet at the top that will have slides, copies of recordings of this presentation, as well as actual clickable links for these resources. Timmy Doomsday. Anyone else? Yes. There is hope, but it's difficult. There is a manual process you can go about. What winds up usually happening is the data gets picked up by data aggregators. So if you remove the original source, that usually isn't the problem. It's companies like MyLife and Spokio and whitepages.com that been verified, what have you, that will scoop up that data in data sets from all these other companies and present it behind a paywall. There are a couple options. You can go about manually requesting that those sites remove it, which is a legal action you can take. It doesn't require a lawyer. You usually have to submit a form that will allow you to be removed from their database. The other option is the company that owns Blur, the email masking company, also has another tool called Delete Me. But again, it's like $200 a year for one person, and they cover 30 to 50 of the top sites, I think. Don't quote me on that number. But that's not sort of like a one-time fee. It's not like you just pay and all this data is gone. It's going to wind up back in there again, especially if like you buy a home or you purchase a vehicle. There's a lot more here that you can do to take back your privacy than just this. That's sort of outside the scope of this talk. You probably noticed like email or like my home address. We didn't cover that. Amazon has to send those packages somewhere. I have to give them a home address. There is a way to go about masking your home address. It involves declaring digital nomad status in the state of South Dakota and or Wisconsin, I think. It's very convoluted. I haven't got it figured out yet, but as soon as I do, I will be certain to put together a presentation on that whole process. Problem with a PO box is they require your actual name and address as listed on your driver's license. If you declare digital nomad status, you can actually put the digital nomad location on your driver's license. It does require you to travel to South Dakota like once every 4 years for 2 days so that you can renew your driver's license and such. Again, outside the scope of this talk, haven't figured that out, can't speak to it with any veracity. But it's definitely something that's definitely an option. There are ways to go about that. That is an option. So you're able to create, you are able to create an LLC. They do require your actual information, but they just don't publicly put it out there. I think it's like New Mexico or Arizona is one of the places. I think South Dakota is also one of those places. The problem is they still, when you sign up for a PO Box, require every name of every recipient that will be receiving mail at that address. Because if you, for example, if like I went and signed up with one today as Timmy Doomsday, right, and something came for John Doe, they'd kick it back. They would not. Whereas, like, if I had something in the name of John Doe delivered to my house, they don't care. They're just going to deliver it. Correct. My problem with the hubs and locations is that there are cameras, usually in those hubs and locations, right? I don't want people knowing where I'm picking up stuff, and a lot of that closed circuit TV camera stuff which used to just be erased after 30 days, right? You could just wait 30 days and not, before you go back somewhere. With the advances in storage technology, I have it on very good authority from certain big box retailers and pharmacy IT staff that information is just kept long term. Like they don't plan on deleting that anytime soon because storage is so cheap at this point. So that sort of now it depends on your threat model. I do want to say that all of this depends on your threat model. If you are targeted by, I don't know, like say a 3-letter agency, one, don't talk to me. I don't need that kind of heat in my life. But two, that blows all of this away. You're done. Like I cannot help you. This will not help you. You need like spycraft level stuff that like borders on illegal. Like none of this involves like creating fake IDs or forging government documents. This is just like lying to big corporations, right? Which you should all do. I'm totally about lying to big box corporations. Anyone else? One more. Yes. Correct. She'll be able to feed the kids because there's cash stashed in the walls. And she does know where that is. But that is a huge gap in all of this, is that it doesn't account for other people. And that is a big concern. I would say if you're going to go about all of this, remember there's that privacy fatigue and there's a lot of work that you have to do. In addition to just covering yourself, you need to worry about your significant other and explaining to them why you're doing all of this stuff and what's going on. Fortunately, my wife is understanding, I guess would be the right word. She lets me get away with a lot, So she was fine with me standing up a server rack in the garage. Fun fact, if a server rack is 6 feet tall, it is not 6 feet diagonal, and you will ruin the top of your garage. I say that from experience. But it is a conversation you need to have, absolutely. And what I've actually started doing is putting together sort of a break the glass USB drive with everything on it, and the only way to get it is if I die. And that requires a really, really good will. Honestly, if you want to dig more into that topic, like what do you do with your digital life after you pass, Kevin Cody gave a great talk at B-Sides Pittsburgh this year that is online that he goes into way more depth on how you can manage a lot of this. He would be a much better resource than I am at this point. Yes? Oh, no. Listen, my wife has very much has a choice. And it's all about give and take. What I worry with my wife and my loved ones is harm reduction, right? I'm not going to have them, there's no way I'm going to be able to have them put on the tinfoil hat. All I can do is hope that I make them more aware, But prying Instagram and Snapchat off of my wife, not going to happen. Not going to happen. There will be divorce before Instagram goes away. I promise you that. Yes, I could. No, it's not a stupid question at all. It's not a stupid question at all. I could get them in her name. However, that could still be tied back. Right now, nothing is in any of our names, so none of that can really get tied back to my personal address, right? If I put it in her name, now people will know who lives in my home. And then they'll be able to tie me to my wife and my wife to my location. Does that make sense? That is why nothing is in either of our names. Well, actually, the mortgage. So this is where it gets confusing, and why my wife is a patient woman. Mortgage is in a trust that's entitled to an LLC. Remember when I said if I die, things will go south quickly. I think I have time for one more question, and then if anyone wants to chat after this, I'll be outside. I'll hang out all day. You know, you guys can pester me with questions. I'm happy to answer them. Last one. Fortunately, I don't have that problem. Because I don't like people taking pictures of me. What I will say, as I'm being recorded, what I will say is, if it's someone that you know, they should know and that actually cares about you as a person enough to have a picture of you on their Facebook. You should be able to have a conversation with them and say, "Hey, listen, this is what I'm striving for. This is what I'm trying to achieve. I really don't want my information out there. Can you please remove that picture?" The nuclear option is actually a DMCA takedown, which can be used for good. And if you're interested in that, the Badass Army, their website, www.thebadassarmy.org, has an entire section on DMCA takedowns. Now, it is targeted at revenge porn, primarily. However, you could potentially leverage it to get photos of you that you don't want out there removed. Cool. That is my time. I'll be outside. Hope you guys have a great rest of the con.